Hi and welcome to Rad Class. Today I'm going to talk a bit about history and the narrative of history and how you have to look at history from all sides because otherwise you can lose a lot of narrative and perspective in it. But I will start out by saying I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I'm not gonna try and say someone didn't do evil or didn't do wrong. I'm just gonna talk about how we often only look at history from one point of view. So I'm gonna start by talking a bit about games and movies because we have a lot of movies about wars. We have a lot of movies about World War II in particular. We have a lot of games as well. But it always seems to be the same narrative they're focused on. It's always the same small battle they're going for instead of actually looking at. There is a great German movie about Stalingrad, and My Honor Was My Loyalty, and they show the ordinary German soldier, and you can actually sense their fear and the depression, and when it goes up to them, and then they realize that what they have been told for the past 10, 15 years were untrue, and that is a very important movie to watch because it shows the German soldier, the German ordinary soldier, not the diehards, not the people who massacred millions of innocent people, but that story needs to be told as well. But by doing this, by watching it from different sides, you get a broader narrative about the history of the war instead of just being all these are bad, all this is good, bang bang, shoot shoot. But you have to turn the narrative a bit around, otherwise you just condemn an entire people to actually being evil. It's like if you go out and ask some people today, what was the first country that got invaded during World War II by Hitler? And they're going to say Poland. But that's not true. The first place he actually invaded, it was a peaceful occupation, was Austria, his home country. But people just kind of forget that. And that is because it isn't always told in the narrative of the story. And also the fact that he wasn't the first one to start a major fight in World War II. That was Japan when they invaded Manchuria and Korea. So it has to be told from a lot of levels and different sides. And that is why I wish there were more movies that covered all around. The same with games. Like we have the Battle of Poland that is almost never covered, but a lot of stuff happened in Poland. There was a lot of discoveries, like they basically cracked the Enigma code before the war started. They held out for a long time, awaiting help from the French and the British because they actually said they would go to war, but they didn't do anything to help Poland really. And then the Soviet attacked, and how they had to move their forces around, how they had to interact, how they tried to save civilians and save soldiers so they could fight on from France and Britain. And it gets forgotten. Today, it's basically just yeah, then Poland was attacked, and then a month later it surrendered. Blah blah. But there is a lot of in that. And then again, when we are talking battles and movies, they could do about the battle at Kursk. The Battle of Kursk is the largest tank battle that has ever been fought in the world at this point. There was like 2 million men fighting, 6,000 tanks and 4,000 airplanes, just going around fighting for days, trying to break the Russian line. And that could be a great movie, seen from either the German or Russian side, or both. Like Clint Eastwood made these amazing movies called Flag is Our Fathers, where you followed Iwo Jima from both sides, the Japanese side and the American side. So you got an idea of where the Japanese came from, why they were doing what they were doing, or how desperate the fight were for the Japanese in the end. They had no food, they had no water, no ammunition, but they still kept fighting because they were told to. And if they did not do as they were told, they were punished. So it's very important to look at all sides of history from all narratives. Like history teaches you a lot of amazing stuff and horrible stuff, and we have to learn from it. Like most people won't be able to tell you why there is a Southern Korea, North Korea today, but that is actually after World War II, when Korea was divided into two pieces. The southern part controlled by the Allies, the northern part controlled by Russia. And that means that they had different states of government. And that is what is still going on today, is the remains of that legacy from World War II. And we have to look at history again in a broad variation because there were good Germans. There were Germans who used their own houses to house people who were condemned to death, to help the children of the Jews who actually risked their own life and own family to help other people. And those people often get forgotten because we just say the entire German population was bad because the Germans were the aggressors of the war. But it's not true. And we have to have that broader definition. Otherwise, the entire history will become black and white. And that is not true at all. It's like saying that the only reason the Germans lost in Russia was because of the winter. And that is a lie who got spread by the Germans back then because they had been telling their people, they have been telling their soldiers that the Russians were lesser being than them. They couldn't stand and fight. They were inferior to them in any way, so they were unable to defeat the German army. And then they began to defeat the German army, and it began before winter. The winters didn't help at all, but the Germans began to run out of steam and fuel because that they had the greatest leader was a maniac who didn't know tactics at all, and he didn't listen to his generals because he was like, "I know best. All of you shut up." And if they said anything against him, they got fired. And they had a major logistic problem because they had to transport all the goods over a vast distance, and the German army wasn't prepared for that. And yes, it began already before the winter struck. It began when the rains began to come in October and September, where the entire road system became so muddy that you couldn't move your army around. But the Germans had to spin it to their people via propaganda to tell them, it was the winter, it was only the winter that did it. The Russians are still, we're gonna beat them, no problems. And that narrative actually struck and stayed in our telling of history. And that is not a good narrative to have because that makes all the sacrifice and all the people dying on the Russian side trying to stop the Germans, all their lives basically becomes lost in vain because, yeah, the Germans only lost because of the weather. And that is not true. It's like saying that the Germans were the first to use gas in World War One, and some of it is partial right, but a lot of people think that the first one to gas the enemy line was the Germans, and that is also not true. It was the French. They used tear gas on the Germans as the first ones in the war. Then, yes, the Germans were the first to use poison gas like chlorine gas, but it was the French who started that. But again, because the French won the war, because the French were the good guys, the narrative have always been pushed over to the bad guys. And it's the same with people getting asked who started World War One. A lot of people will say that was the Germans. And again, that is not true. And I'm not trying to defend the German people in overall here or the history of violence at all. I'm just stating facts like it was the former empire of Austria-Hungary who started World War One because the Archduke was assassinated in Serbia and they wanted to annex Serbia. So it gave them an excuse to actually go into war with Serbia. And they did everything they could to push Serbia to the point where they couldn't say yes to the agreement sent to them. And then they went into war with them. And then it all escalated because then Russia declared war on them. and because they were allied with Serbia, and then the Germans declared war on the Russians, and then the French joined in, and it was just terrible, terrible, terrible. The death toll of World War One is terrible, and it is a horrible thing to imagine having to go through. But it wasn't the Germans who started, but they got the blame after World War One because after the signage of the Versailles Treaty, then the entire empire of Austria-Hungary was divided into smaller countries, and then there were no one to take to blame and no one to give the bill for the countless lives lost. So the Germans were like, "You had to get this," and again, that is not true. They didn't start it, but they were ready for a fight. There's no question about that. They were so ready. They were like, "Yeah, yeah, sure, you can declare war. We will help you no matter what." But they did not start the war. And it's important, as I state, to know all the history from all the sides by all the narratives, because it is true, history is told by the winning side. But we have to get the history from both sides to understand what started it all, what was the epicenter of all this, because then we can learn from it. If we only get told that the Germans were bad people and this is how it started, and because of Hitler coming to power, then we lose the narrative in it. We lose all the steps from after World War One and all the way up to the start of World War Two. And there's a lot of steps, and there become a lot of great documentaries about it. And it's so nice to see, but they are still often told in the narrative of the views of the Allies. They are often not told from the side of the Germans, what they went through. And that is something we need. That is something we need a lot. And I watch a lot of documentaries. I love documentaries. And I have seen how the facts are distorted depending on what country of origin the documentary have. Like I saw a documentary about World War One, and I saw it from three sides: the German, the French, and the USA. And the Germans stated French started with poison gas, with tear gas, the French told almost the same story as the Germans. And then the Americans were like, we saw the unjust in this world and we had to step in and save the world. Where both the German and French were like, and then the Americans have to join in because they have lent a massive amount of money to the French and British. And they feared if the Germans won, they couldn't get paid back. And that distortion of reality can lead an entire country to believe something that is untrue. And we have to learn from it because the only way we can make our present and future a better place is to learn from history. The last 100 years, we had a lot of wars. We had, even though we thought that wars was beginning to scale down because we began to have tanks and machine guns. It all just got worse, and we keep having wars, and we keep having leaders who use the rhetoric and the tools of the previous leaders, like the Third Reich. And we need to be able to compare those people to say, what you are saying now, what you're doing now, is basically what started World War II. We have to stop you now. And you can only do that if you actually know history and have been taught it the right way from all sides, all narratives, because then you can begin to see the rhetoric in leaders of the world today and how they still use some of the rhetoric that were used back then. And it's horrifying to see that we still allow it because we didn't have the knowledge and the know-how to actually compare them. And often, if you compare them, you become ridiculed and you've been told, oh, that's not the same. You cannot compare these two people because they're not the same. But if they are saying the same thing in a broader way, then they are saying the same thing and they can be compared. And that is something you need to do. And it is something that's been done many times and it needs to continue to be done because that is the way we stop the past from happening again. So we can move towards a brighter present, a brighter future where we can learn from our mistakes so we don't repeat them. Because the only way we learn is to know we made a mistake, get corrected, and try a new thing. So I hope that by telling this and by talking a bit about it, I have reached someone who makes movies or someone who makes documentaries or someone who makes games and told get them to think about why are we doing this? What is the narrative? Can we see it from the other side as well? So we can see that uh, maybe not all the German soldiers were bad, like in the movie on Netflix. And it's something we need to do. And if you're sitting there wondering, but what about a documentary of World War One? There's a YouTube channel that tells a great story about it. It's called The Great War. Follow that. Watch all the episodes. They cover every day basically, and it's amazing. And it is made from people from two parts of the world, so they have all narratives, and it's amazing because they don't care about where you're from. They're just telling the facts, just like I'm trying to do right now. And that is important. It is important to get all the facts without all the washing, all the we have to sell this and stuff. Because what can happen is terrible mistakes that already had happened. And one of the worst examples we have that haunts us today is after World War One, there was a rumor that the Germans had raped, killed, and eaten babies in Belgium because that was something the Allies used to sell how horrified the German soldier was. And after the war, they conducted searches and nothing had happened at that sort. But that thing actually turned out after the war to be untrue, and people were told it was untrue. And that meant when the Allies and the Russians began to say, we have found these camps where people have been slaved to death, where they have been killed in the death camps, then a lot of people were like, nah, 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 that's just like you said in World War One. And then they did not believe it. And that unbelievable thing still haunts today because there's still people today who don't believe that it happened. And that is horrible. That is why we have to get an all-around view of history and not just watch it from one side, but from all around. So I hope you found this interesting, educational, and I hope that I did not offend any of you. And if I do, I'm sorry, but I just have to get this off my chest because it has bothered me for a lot of years actually. And I hope that by telling the story about how some facts get distorted due to the narrative of the country you live in, that you will become more aware of the narrative that you're living in, so you can try and educate yourself and see it all from a broader side. So this has been Rare Class, and have a pleasant day.